DG, you've heard Mr. Leung's question. Could you give the answer now?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Leung, for your question and your comments. I'd like to explain about the requirements under CAP 448C. Aviation service provider is required to report occurrence, and following that we have our work is divided into two stages. As for the MOR database, it's regarded as the latter stage, as the monitoring agency, the CAD, is responsible for fixing the issue, so to speak. So for the preliminary work, regardless of what happened to the MOR database, we were required to take action. So although problems are identified in the MOR database, I'd like to say this to members and the public, that the deficiencies in the MOR database did not affect aviation safety. As for improving the management of the MOR database and to better utilize the data in the database, we accept the audit's comments, and after the audit report has been published, we immediately make improvements. We update information in the MOR database, and we also try our best in analyzing the occurrences in the MOR database and see what we can improve on. For example, for the problems identified, we discuss with the airport authority and the maintenance service providers, so on and so forth. We have been liaising with the counterparts. However, as regards the MOR database, we also rectify the inadequacies in the MOR database. Well, I just want to point out that you need to improve your tool if you want to do your job properly. And according to CAP 448C, the Director General of Civil Aviation has the following power. As the management authority to ensure civil aviation safety, you may, under CAP 448C, request all parties or any party that may direct or indirectly affect civil aviation safety to give you data. And after proper analysis of the data and proper management of the data, this database can be a very useful tool. From this audit report, however, we find that in the past 15 years, this management tool, namely the database, has not been utilized to the full. This is what I wish to point out. For example, in 1999, you established a mandatory occurrence reporting scheme, and the Director General of Civil Aviation should be the #1 person of assuring civil aviation safety. And you should consider from the management's perspective who should be required under CAP 448C to make a report and what the reports should include, and after that what analysis should be done to help you improve your management. So will you consider, before we compile our report, give us a list of how you would conclude the experience that you gained in the past 15 years, starting from 1999. From the perspective of an officer responsible for managing civil aviation safety, how you would improve the collection of data for the database and analysis of data, how civil aviation safety could be better and more efficiently managed. Can you give us a paper so that we can see at a glance what follow-up actions should be taken? Yes, we can do that. Based on the reporting of occurrences in the past 15 years, we can give a conclusion on our experience, how we can improve the system, and how we can improve our data analysis. We can supplement this information to LegCo later. Right, this morning we asked about part 2, but we haven't finished that. We just dealt with part 3 about PRM radar. Now, if we have further questions, we can ask in writing or follow up next time. The next part we have dealt with the majority of the questions, part 5, and then next part, the way forward. You can give us a report according to Mr. Leung's suggestion, and something about the sequence of events. In Gen 3, which you submitted on the 15th of December, I have a number of questions. In para 6, you said that before preparing tender, you visited a number of places. Can you tell us which of the places you didn't go? We went to many places like UK, Australia, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Northern European countries to inspect their civil aviation management, and we also discussed with their senior staff on their civil aviation management and the demand. So after paying these visits, you understood their illustration of their aviation management. Were you satisfied with the visits? Anything you could learn for the purpose of improving the management in Hong Kong? I think we could consider it from the perspective of hardware and software. I can say at the time, the tender assessment panel colleagues, you mean? The main staff for project management, I'm referring to these colleagues. There were colleagues with actual operational experience. So what were their views? Having consolidated the experience they gained from different duty visits, they prepared the tender document. So you did not visit Dubai, India, did you? No. So you didn't go to Dubai, India. Have you checked their system? No, because the commencement of their systems were rather late. So you didn't visit these two places. So, you visited other places except these two. So you incorporated from Dubai, India, in your Pt3 systems, not the other places, right? We did not visit Dubai or India to look at their system. So just some more clarifications. In para 13, there'll be more questions from here, but first, just to clarify, in terms of acceptance tests, the CAD had identified a lot of deficiencies. Where did the deficiencies stem from? Did you regard them as safe or not? This is mainly about the factory acceptance test on the part of the manufacturer. We found so many deficiencies, and our comments were passed on to them, and we did not further categorize the deficiencies as safe or not. We asked the manufacturer to follow up on the deficiencies, however, and following that, they rectified the majority of them. So, were these comments within or outside the contract? Because, as you said, some comments did not involve safety issues, did not involve other issues, but were they inside or outside the contract? It wasn't mentioned in para 13. Maybe I'll defer to Mr. Wu. Thank you, Chairman, for your question. According to my understanding, the colleague at the time attended the factory acceptance test, and whenever deficiencies were found in the system, my question is very simple. Is it within or outside the contract about the observations that you put down in the paragraph? Both, according to my knowledge. How many were inside the contract? How many were outside? And was it after the variation or what? Because I can't see here whether it's after both variations. Were they variation items or not? Because you put it rather general in the paragraph. I want to follow up on your question. Can you give us a list or table with so many, hundreds of deficiencies and errors? Can you organize them? How many were before the variation, or how many were after variation number 2, or how many were included in the contract, how many were not? So do some categorization. Of course, you would have to read the documents, but I think we need to know that. Yes, because in Gen 3 you have included a lot, but we have a lot of questions on that, and we need to have all the information available before we ask questions next time. Para 14. You said that originally the time frame anticipated was quite aggressive.
Be a bit too ambitious. So my
question is this. This is a $1.5 billion project, and you just gave us one sentence to explain it. There was a dedicated project team to investigate, study the project, and you had duty visits around the world to look into various systems. You also had a D3 colleague responsible for that. So about this sentence, is it backed by science? Was there any strategy? Was there any scientific methodology behind? I find it quite shocking that you only put down one sentence. it shows a great problem in the department's management. Can you explain? As I understand, this project team, in formulating this timetable, did analyze some system requirements and equipment needed, and it also consulted different manufacturers. With these requirements, roughly how much time would it take? And that was an impression that they had at the time, that roughly it would take about 2.5 years. What I can say is this: by the time we awarded the tender, the period permitted at first was just 2.5 years or so. Well, but you put forward this timetable. You put a similar timetable in the paper to FC. Why is it that in hindsight you said that the timetable was a bit too ambitious, or the schedule was a bit too ambitious? So that was the word you used. Go back and think about it. You don't need to answer me now. And we also have a representative from the Bureau. We asked the Secretary to come at our first meeting because it had to do with governance. CAD was under your Bureau's purview. So how was the liaison done with such major problems? Was there any correspondence between the Bureau and the department? Did you reprimand the department for their wrongdoings, for the poor scheduling of works? Do you have any documents for our reference? I am thinking from the governance perspective. Thank you, Chairman. About the contract variations, as I understand, and I can go back and check the records again, the Bureau, it was not necessary for the Bureau to be involved regarding contract variations at the time. As for the project schedule, our permanent secretary did regularly liaise with the CAD by way of regular meetings, and this schedule was mentioned every time we had a meeting. After so many things happened, why didn't you do anything? Why did you not react to it until the audit report number 63 was published? So in terms of governance, I'd like to have a look at the minutes of your meetings and whether you reprimanded the department and instructed them what to do. And about the Central Tender Board, there were major contract variations. Did they report to your Bureau? Did you agree or not? Because this document I find so many questions arising from this document. And I cannot ignore this paper. You're the final gatekeeper. In the contract, there were such major variations to the contract. Was it fair? Like we mentioned just now, $80 million or $90 million. Did you monitor them? Now about the contract, if it was a tender item approved by the Centre Tendering Board, and if the contract had to be varied, not exceeding 30% of the total amount, approval had to be sought from the GLD. If it exceeded 30%, however, the item would have to be submitted to the Central Tender Board again. So for the two variations, the amount involved was only 18% each time, so approval was sought from the GLD only.
30% 咧，如果佢兩次嘅
Well, you mentioned 30%. If in between the two variations is three months, and then every time they did not exceed 30%, they made it 10%, 20%. That means you had no role to play. So any time frame for this 30% within a year or what? Let me ask you another question. You answer in one go. The variations are actually part of the substance of the contract. That is, if something is not in the contract and they wanted to add something, there will be a problem. Say, if it is $1.5 billion, they shouldn't exceed 30%. Like last time, we heard that they added a toilet, cum shower facility, and so forth. If you come to LegCo, you should be very clear. You got items A to Z, for example, 26 items, but suddenly you got 28 or even 38. The remaining were not in the contract. So Mr. Leung was asked about the definition of 30%. Is it up to them to add or reduce items? What about this variation of 30%? Can you explain? Concerning Mr. Leung's question about the 30%, we're referring to the total amount of variation. If it is a one-off variation of 30%, they had to go to the CTB. Whether it's 2 times or 3 times, the accumulative variation must not exceed 30%. So we're talking about an accumulative figure. And every time when a department asked for a variation, be it the CTB or the government's own assessment panel, they had to observe the contract terms. So would you come back and report to the LegCo's FC? Because in your papers, you spelled out very clearly what would be included. If they suddenly made a change, the onus is on you, right, to notify us. Chairman, if the variation amount is so big as to deviate from that in the FC paper, we would not give them approval, because when the FC approved the project, there's a certain scope to follow. So if they exceed the scope, we would not grant them approval. So the onus rests with the department. You understand that my questions just now were on accountability and responsibility. So, if the variation is within the scope approved by LegCo's FC, you would grant approval, otherwise not, right? Well, if the variation exceeds the scope set by the LegCo, we won't grant our approval. Thank you. Sorry, this evening from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. we've originally scheduled another meeting, but now we have to wait for your papers. So the meeting from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. would be cancelled. As for the date of the next meeting, we'll liaise with you to fix a date. DG, I hope that within 5 days or 7 days, well, I don't know how you count your week, you should send in your papers as soon as possible. And there's another reply letter from you in relation to questions posed by a member of the public. For that paper, we will not include that in our open report, because for certain questions, we really have to ascertain or verify the information, but your reply to the public will not be included in our report. Thank you very much.